The morning light filtering through our kitchen window caught the torn edges of paper scattered across the garbage can like confetti. My heart stopped. There, mixed with coffee grounds and orange peels, were the remnants of something I'd spent 3 months creating. The anniversary scrapbook I'd made for Derek lay destroyed, its carefully preserved photos of our 7-year marriage now stained with kitchen waste. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I pulled piece after piece from the trash with trembling hands. The ticket stubs from our first date at the Portland Symphony. The pressed roses from our wedding bouquet. The handwritten notes Derek used to leave in my lunch bag during our early years together. All of it torn apart and discarded like worthless garbage. But it was the inscription on the cover page that broke something inside me. In my careful calligraphy I had written, "To my beloved Derek, may we have 70 more years of adventures together. All my love always, Claire." Someone had scribbled over it in red ink, "Pathetic romantic garbage from a desperate housewife." The handwriting wasn't Derek's, it was feminine, sharp, and unfamiliar. My legs gave out and I sank onto the kitchen floor, surrounded by the shredded pieces of what I thought represented our love story. 7 years of marriage reduced to literal trash by my husband and apparently another woman. Derek had left early that morning for what he claimed was a weekend business conference in Seattle. He'd kissed my forehead absently and promised to call when he arrived. That call never came. Now I understood why. The worst part wasn't even the destruction of my gift. It was the memory of Derek's reaction when I'd presented it to him 3 days earlier on our anniversary. He'd glanced through it quickly, muttered "thanks honey," and set it aside to check his phone. I'd attributed his distraction to work stress. I'd made excuses for his indifference. I'd been such a fool. My phone buzzed with a text message. Derek's name appeared on the screen, but when I opened it, my world tilted further off its axis. The message contained a photo clearly not meant for me. Derek and a stunning redhead were clinking champagne glasses in what looked like an expensive hotel room. She wore nothing but a silk robe that revealed more than it concealed. The message read, "Missing you already, baby. Can't wait for round 2 tonight." I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't place her immediately. Then it hit me like a punch to the stomach. Vanessa Cole, the new marketing director at Derek's architectural firm. The one he'd mentioned casually over dinner a few months ago. The one who was really helping streamline their client presentations. The one whose laugh I'd heard in the background during his late-night work call. I spent the next hour mechanically piecing together fragments of photographs, trying to salvage what remained of my demolished anniversary gift. My hands moved automatically while my mind raced through the past few months, recognizing patterns I'd been too trusting to see before. The late nights at the office that had become increasingly frequent. The new cologne Derek had started wearing. The way he'd begun working out obsessively and updating his wardrobe with clothes far more stylish than his usual conservative choices. The secret phone calls he'd take outside, claiming they were about sensitive client matters. Most damning of all, the way he'd grown increasingly critical of me. Comments about my cooking, my appearance, my lack of ambition as a freelance graphic designer. Suggestions that maybe I should consider getting a real job instead of working from our home studio. The gradual erosion of compliments and affection, replaced by casual cruelty disguised as helpful observations. I was still sitting on the kitchen floor when the doorbell rang. For a wild moment I hoped Derek had returned early to explain everything, to tell me there was some terrible misunderstanding. Instead I opened the door to find Margaret Brennan, Derek's 78-year-old aunt, standing on our porch with a covered casserole dish. "Claire, dear," she said, taking in my tear-stained face and the bits of paper still clinging to my clothes. "You look absolutely terrible. What's wrong?" Maggie was Derek's father's sister, a sharp-minded retired librarian who'd never married and had no children of her own. She'd always been kind to me, but we'd never developed a particularly close relationship. Derek maintained dutiful contact with her, visiting monthly and handling some of her affairs, but I'd always sensed there was tension beneath their polite interaction. "I'm fine, Maggie," I lied, stepping aside to let her enter. "Derek's away on business, and I'm just having a difficult morning." She set the casserole on our dining room table and studied me with eyes that missed nothing. "Business, is it? Interest. I just saw him at the Pine Ridge Resort yesterday afternoon, having lunch with a young woman who certainly wasn't conducting any business meeting I've ever witnessed." My stomach dropped. Pine Ridge was an exclusive resort about an hour outside Riverside, known for its romantic atmosphere and discreet accommodations. "You saw Derek?" "Indeed I did. I was having lunch with my book club when I spotted him through the restaurant window. He and his companion were quite affectionate. She was a striking redhead, maybe 30 years old. Maggie's expression grew stern. I assumed there was some explanation, but given your current state, I'm beginning to understand the situation more clearly. I sank into a dining room chair, the last of my composure crumbling. He destroyed the anniversary gift I made him. Threw it in the trash like it was nothing. I found it this morning mixed with garbage, with someone else's handwriting calling me pathetic. Maggie's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. She moved to the kitchen and returned with the pieces I'd attempted to reassemble. Her fingers traced over a photograph of Derek and me from our honeymoon, now torn in half. This is exquisite work, Claire. You spent considerable time and care creating this. 3 months, I whispered. I tracked down duplicates of photos he'd lost, contacted old friends for pictures I didn't have, wrote out all our special memories by hand. I thought it would remind him of why we fell in love. And instead he showed you exactly how little your marriage means to him. Maggie set the fragments down with unusual gentleness. Claire, how much do you know about Derek's financial situation? The question caught me off guard. We keep separate accounts for personal expenses, but we have a joint savings account and checking account. When did you last review your bank statements? I realized with growing unease that I hadn't checked our accounts in several weeks. Derek had always handled most of our finances, claiming his business background made him better suited for managing investments and bills. I'd been content to focus on my design work and trust him to handle the money responsibly. With shaking hands, I pulled up our online banking on my phone. The joint savings account that should have contained nearly $40,000 now showed a balance of $312. Multiple large withdrawals over the past month had systematically drained our entire emergency fund. He took everything, I breathed, staring at the screen in disbelief. $40,000 gone. Maggie nodded grimly. The same pattern I've been watching him use with my own assets for the past year. Derek has been systematically stealing from me as well, Claire. Small amounts at first, then increasingly bold thefts disguised as helping with my affairs. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? Derek convinced me 6 months ago to give him power of attorney over my financial accounts. He claimed it would make things easier as I got older, help him assist with bills and investments. Since then, over $60,000 has disappeared from my account. When I questioned the withdrawals, Derek provided explanations about necessary home repairs, medical expenses, and investment opportunities that never materialized. The scope of Derek's betrayal expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. This wasn't just an affair or even the end of our marriage. This was calculated theft from the 2 women who trusted him most. Maggie, we need to report this to the police. This is fraud. She shook her head slowly. I've consulted with an attorney, Catherine Price. She's explained that proving financial abuse by a family member with legal authority is extremely difficult. Derek has been clever about covering his tracks, creating plausible explanations for every withdrawal. The police would likely consider it a civil matter, not criminal fraud. I felt trapped, helpless against someone who'd been planning his betrayal far longer than I'd realized. So he just gets away with it. He destroys our marriage, steals our money, and faces no consequence. Maggie's expression shifted, and for the first time I saw something calculating in her eyes. I didn't say that, dear. I said legal remedies would be difficult. But Derek has made several critical mistakes, and he doesn't realize how much I know about his activity. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Tell me, Claire, how would you feel about ensuring Derek faces appropriate consequences for his choices? Something in her tone made me pay attention in a way I hadn't before. This wasn't the frail elderly woman Derek often described when explaining why he needed to help manage her affairs. This was someone with a sharp mind and apparently a plan. What kind of consequence? The kind that would ensure he understands exactly what he's lost and can never do this to anyone else again. Maggie reached into her purse and withdrew a folder. I've been documenting Derek's theft for months, gathering evidence Catherine suggested would be useful. But I've also been investigating his other activities. She opened the folder to reveal photographs, bank records, and printed emails. The photos showed Derek and Vanessa in various compromising situations around Riverside and Portland. The bank records detailed the systematic theft from both our accounts. Most shocking of all were printed emails from Derek's personal account to Vanessa, discussing their plans to move in together once he handled the Claire situation. How did you get these? I asked, amazed by the thoroughness of her documentation. Derek underestimated me, just as he underestimated you. He assumed I was too old and trusting to notice his manipulation. He gave me access to his email account months ago, supposedly so I could help coordinate his work schedule with family obligations. He forgot that librarians are excellent researchers with strong attention to detail. The emails were devastating. Derek had been planning to divorce me for months, but wanted to drain our shared assets first and establish his relationship with Vanessa before making the separation official. He'd written to her about my pathetic romantic gestures and desperate attempts to save our dead marriage. The anniversary gift I'd created with such love had been nothing more than an annoying obstacle to his plans. But the most damaging evidence was Derek's own words about his theft from Maggie. In emails to Vanessa, he'd bragged about how easy it was to manipulate the old bat, and how her money was funding their relationship. He'd referred to Maggie as practically senile and joked about inheriting the rest of her assets within a few years. He thinks I'm incompetent and dying, Maggie said with grim satisfaction. He has no idea that my mind is perfectly sharp and my health is excellent. My doctor expects me to live at least another 20 years. I stared at this woman I'd thought I knew, realizing I'd been as blind about Maggie as I'd been about Derek.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
You've been planning something. Indeed I have. Derek believes he's been clever, but he's actually been walking into a carefully constructed trap. Every theft he's committed, every lie he's told, every cruel comment about both of us has been documented. But I needed a partner, someone else he'd wronged who could help ensure our plan succeeded completely. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Derek has made the mistake of underestimating both of us, Claire. He sees you as a naive romantic and me as a doddering old woman. He has no idea what he's actually dealing with. For the first time since finding my anniversary gift in the trash, I felt something other than heartbreak and humiliation. A spark of anger was growing into something much more powerful. What do you need me to do? Maggie's smile was sharp and satisfying. First, we need to document everything Derek doesn't realize we know. Then we need to ensure that when his world collapses, he understands exactly why it happened and who made it possible. She pulled out another folder, this one containing legal documents. Catherine has prepared several options for us, depending on how far we're willing to take this. Derek thinks he's been playing games with two helpless women. He's about to discover just how wrong he's. I looked around our dining room, remembering all the dinners Derek and I had shared at this table, all the plans we'd made, all the dreams he'd been secretly destroying while smiling at my face. The anniversary gift had been my last attempt to save something that was already dead. Now it was time to ensure Derek understood exactly what his betrayal was going to cost him. Tell me everything, I said, meeting Maggie's eyes with new determination. I want him to pay for all of it. Maggie opened the legal folder and began explaining a plan that would ensure Derek's actions had consequences far beyond anything he could imagine. As she spoke, I realized that sometimes the people who seem most vulnerable are actually the most dangerous when they've been pushed too far. Derek was about to learn that lesson in the most devastating way possible. Catherine Price arrived at our house within 2 hours of Maggie's phone call. The attorney was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the elderly, conservative lawyer I'd imagined, Catherine was a woman in her mid-40s with steel gray hair pulled back severely, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of our situation with clinical precision. She set her briefcase on our dining room table with the efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with family crises. Maggie has briefed me on the basic situation, she said without preamble. Before we proceed, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with and what outcomes you're hoping to achieve. I glanced at Maggie, suddenly uncertain about the wisdom of whatever plan they'd been developing. I want Derek to face consequences for what he's done. The theft, the affair, the way he's treated both of us. But I don't want to do anything illegal. Catherine nodded approvingly. Smart approach. What Derek has done crosses several legal boundaries, but proving it in court would be challenging, given his careful documentation of fake justifications. However, there are other ways to ensure appropriate consequences that don't require criminal proceeding. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a stack of documents. Let me explain what Derek doesn't know about his current legal and financial situation. First, the power of attorney he convinced Maggie to sign contains specific clauses that limit his authority to transactions she explicitly approves in writing. Every withdrawal he's made without written authorization constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. Maggie smiled with satisfaction. I insisted on those clauses when we signed the original documents, claiming I wanted to maintain some control over my affairs. Derek was so eager to access my accounts that he barely read the fine print. Second, Catherine continued, the joint accounts Derek has been draining contain funds that can be traced to Claire's freelance income and her late father's inheritance. We can establish that significant portions of those assets legally belong to Claire individually, making Derek's withdrawals theft of separate property. I felt the first stirring of hope since discovering my ruined anniversary gift. How do we prove that? Your father's inheritance was deposited directly into the joint account, but the bank records show the exact amount and date. Your freelance payments can be documented through your business records and tax return. We can establish a clear paper trail showing that Derek has stolen approximately $28,000 of your individual assets. Catherine spread out financial documents that painted a damning picture of Derek's activity. But the most interesting discovery is what Derek has been doing with the stolen money. He's not just funding his affair with Vanessa, he's been making investments and purchases in his name only, converting joint assets and Maggie's money into his personal wealth. She pointed to a series of transactions I'd never seen before. A boat purchased last month for $35,000, registered solely in Derek's name. Stock investments totaling $18,000 in an account only he can access. Premium payments on a life insurance policy where Vanessa is the sole beneficiary. The scope of Derek's planning stunned me. This wasn't an impulsive affair or even simple theft. This was a methodical destruction of our marriage and systematic conversion of our shared assets into his personal wealth, all while positioning himself financially for a future with another woman. He's been preparing to leave me for months, I said, the full reality finally sinking. Everything we built together, he's been stealing piece by piece. Exactly, Catherine confirmed, and because he's done it gradually, with plausible explanations for each transaction, proving criminal intent would be difficult. But that doesn't mean he's going to get away with. She turned to a fresh set of documents. Oregon is a community property state with specific provisions for asset recovery in cases of financial misconduct. We can file for immediate asset freezing, emergency spousal support, and restitution of separate property. More importantly, we can ensure that Derek's new assets are considered part of the marital estate subject to division. Maggie leaned forward with interest. What about the money he stole from me? That's where things get particularly interesting, Catherine replied. Because Derek used false pretenses to obtain power of attorney and then exceeded his legal authority, we have grounds for both civil recovery and potentially criminal charges for elder financial abuse. Oregon takes elder abuse very seriously, with penalties that include mandatory restitution and possible imprisonment. The attorney pulled out another folder. But before we proceed with legal action, we need to consider strategy. Derek thinks he's been clever, but he's actually been creating evidence of his own misconduct. If we move too quickly, he might try to hide assets or manipulate the situation. Instead, I recommend we document everything he doesn't know we've discovered, then present him with the full scope of his exposure all at once. What do you mean? I asked. Catherine's expression grew calculating. Derek believes you're both naive and powerless. He's counting on you remaining ignorant of his activities until he's ready to reveal them on his terms. Instead, we're going to let him continue digging his hole deeper while we build an airtight case. She outlined a plan that would require patience and careful execution. Over the next several weeks, we would document every move Derek made, every lie he told, every asset he tried to hide. Meanwhile, Catherine would prepare legal filings that could be submitted immediately when we were ready to act. The goal is to ensure that when Derek realizes what's happening, he faces the full consequences all at once, with no opportunity to minimize the damage or manipulate the situation, she explained. Maggie nodded approvingly. Let him think he's winning right up until the moment he loses everything. Catherine turned to me with a serious expression. Claire, this approach requires you to continue your normal routine while gathering evidence. You'll need to interact with Derek as if you know nothing about his activities. Can you handle that level of deception? I thought about the destroyed anniversary gift, the stolen money, the cruel emails about my pathetic romantic gestures. The Derek I'd loved and trusted had never truly existed. The man who'd been sharing my bed and my life was a stranger who saw me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to cherish. I can handle it, I said with more conviction than I'd felt in months. What do you need me to do? Catherine handed me a small device that looked like a standard phone charger. This is a digital recorder. Derek won't suspect anything unusual about a phone charger being plugged in around the house. It will capture conversations and phone calls that might provide additional evidence of his plans. She also gave me software to install on our shared computer that would monitor Derek's internet activity and email access. He's been careless about covering his digital track. This will help us document his ongoing communications with Vanessa and any attempts to hide assets. Maggie reached into her purse and withdrew a small notebook. I've been keeping a detailed log of every interaction with Derek for the past 6 months. Times, dates, specific conversations, witnesses present. We need to document everything from this point forward with the same level of detail. The transformation in both women was remarkable. The grieving wife and frail elderly aunt Derek thought he was manipulating had been replaced by strategic allies with clear purpose and methodical planning. For the first time since my world collapsed that morning, I felt like I had some measure of control. There's one more element we need to consider, Catherine said. Derek's relationship with Vanessa provides us with additional leverage. She works at his architectural firm, which has strict policies about workplace relationships and conflicts of interest. If their affair becomes public knowledge, it could impact Derek's career beyond just the personal consequences. She showed us printouts of Derek's company employee handbook. The firm requires disclosure of romantic relationships between employees, especially those involving potential supervisory conflicts. Derek and Vanessa have been violating company policy for months. If the affair becomes known, particularly in the context of his financial misconduct, Derek could face professional sanctions including termination. Maggie smiled with grim satisfaction. So we're not just recovering stolen money and ending a bad marriage. We're ensuring Derek understands that actions have consequences across every aspect of his life. Exactly, Catherine confirmed. The goal is comprehensive accountability. Derek has been treating both of you as disposable, assuming he could steal and cheat without facing meaningful consequence. We're going to demonstrate just how wrong he's been. Over the next hour, Catherine walked us through every aspect of the plan. I would return to my normal routine, continuing to work on my graphic design projects while secretly documenting Derek's activities. Maggie would maintain her usual schedule of visits and phone calls, playing the role of the trusting elderly relative while gathering additional evidence of Derek's theft and contempt. Meanwhile, Catherine would prepare legal filings for asset recovery, emergency protective orders, and elder abuse charges. She would also research Derek's professional obligations and prepare documentation that could be forwarded to his employer when the time was right. The key is timing, Catherine emphasized. We need to let Derek continue his current path long enough to build an overwhelming case, but not so long that he has time to hide more assets or create additional complications. She estimated we would need approximately 3 weeks to gather sufficient evidence and prepare all necessary legal documents. During that time, Derek will likely continue draining accounts, making investments in his own name, and documenting his affair with Vanessa. Every action he takes will strengthen our case and increase his ultimate exposure. As Catherine packed her briefcase, she turned to me with a final piece of advice. Claire, the next few weeks will be emotionally challenging. You'll need to interact normally with someone who's betrayed you, while knowing things about his activities that he doesn't realize you know. If you need support or feel like the situation is becoming too difficult, call me immediately. After Catherine left, Maggie and I sat in the living room surrounded by evidence of Derek's betrayal. The destroyed anniversary gift pieces were still scattered on the coffee table, a tangible reminder of how little our marriage had meant to him. Are you certain you want to do that? Maggie asked gently. Once we set this plan in motion, there's no going back. Derek will never forgive you for what we're about to do to him. I picked up a fragment of one of our wedding photos, torn in half, so that Derek's face was separated from mine. He destroyed our marriage long before I found that gift in the trash. He just didn't bother telling me about it. I'm done being the naive wife who makes excuses for her husband's cruelty. Maggie nodded with approval. Then let's make sure Derek Hamilton learns that underestimating women was the biggest mistake of his life. That evening, I began my new role as Derek's unsuspecting wife. I installed the monitoring software on our computer, positioned the recording device where it would capture conversations, and prepared to document every lie he would tell me over the next 3 weeks. When Derek called that night from his supposed business conference, I listened to his familiar lies with new understanding. He told me about boring meetings and difficult clients, all while I could hear music and laughter in the background that sounded nothing like a business hotel. I miss you, honey, he said in the same tone he'd used throughout our marriage. Can't wait to get home and spend time with you. I miss you too, I replied, playing my part while mentally recording every false word for future use. Take care of yourself, Derek, I love you. As I hung up the phone, I realized those might be the last words of love I would ever speak to my husband. By the time Derek returned home, everything between us would be different, even if only I knew it yet. The next 3 weeks would determine whether Derek's betrayal would destroy me or transform me into someone strong enough to ensure he faced appropriate consequences. I was determined it would be the latter. Maggie called before I went to bed that night. How are you feeling about everything, dear? Scared, I admitted. But also more determined than I've ever been in my life. Derek thinks he can dispose of people when they become inconvenient. He's about to learn how wrong he is. Good, Maggie said with satisfaction. Because tomorrow we begin making sure Derek Hamilton never underestimates another woman for the rest of his life. Derek returned from his supposed business conference on Monday evening, with a bouquet of grocery store flowers and an elaborate story about difficult clients and hotel mix-ups that explained why he'd been unreachable for most of the weekend. He kissed my cheek with the same casual affection he'd shown for months, completely unaware that I now knew exactly where he'd spent his time and with whom. Sorry I couldn't call more, sweetheart, he said, loosening his tie as he settled into his favorite chair. The conference ran late every night, and you know how those hotel phone systems can be unreliable. I accepted the flowers with what I hoped appeared to be genuine gratitude while the hidden recorder captured every word of his fabricated explanation. That's all right, honey. I kept myself busy working on the Morrison project. How did your presentation go? Derek launched into detailed fiction about client meetings and architectural proposals that had never happened. He spoke with such conviction about imaginary colleagues and fake project timelines that I marveled at his capacity for deception. This wasn't someone telling occasional white lies to cover an affair. This was someone who constructed elaborate alternate realities with the ease of a professional con artist. Actually, there might be some good news coming out of all this, Derek continued, accepting the beer I handed him. Jim Morrison mentioned they might have additional projects in the pipeline. Could mean some significant bonuses if things work out right. I nodded encouragingly while mentally cataloging another lie. There was no Jim Morrison in Derek's client database. No architectural firm with projects large enough to generate significant bonuses. But there was a $35,000 boat registered in Derek's name, and stock investments that had been purchased with money stolen from our joint accounts. The next morning, after Derek left for work, I accessed our computer to check the monitoring software Catherine had installed. The results were immediately revealing. Derek had spent Sunday night emailing Vanessa from what he thought was the privacy of his hotel room, describing intimate details of their weekend together and making plans for their future once he resolved the Claire situation. The emails contained information that went far beyond simple affair planning. Derek had been researching divorce attorneys and had apparently consulted with at least 2 firms about strategies for protecting assets during separation proceedings. One email referenced ensuring Claire gets the minimum required by law while preserving the bulk of our investments for our future together. Most damaging of all was Derek's casual revelation of his theft from Mag. In one message to Vanessa, he wrote, "The old bat transferred another $8,000 last week without even questioning what it was for. I told her it was for some emergency home repairs, and she signed the authorization without reading it. At this rate, we'll have enough for the down payment on that Portland condo by Christmas." I printed everything and added it to the growing file of evidence Catherine was assembling. Each email, each financial transaction, each documented lie was another nail in the coffin Derek was unknowingly building for himself. Maggie called that afternoon with an update on her own investigation. "Derek visited yesterday evening after he dropped you off," she reported. "He wanted me to sign another authorization for $15,000, supposedly for investment opportunities that couldn't wait. He seemed nervous when I asked for details about the investments. Did you sign it?" I asked, hoping we weren't too late to prevent another theft. "Of course not, dear." I told him I needed time to review the documents with my financial advisor. He became quite agitated and suggested I was being unnecessarily suspicious of family. The conversation became rather unpleasant when I insisted on waiting. Maggie's voice carried satisfaction as she continued. But the most interesting part happened after Derek left. He called Vanessa from my driveway, apparently thinking I couldn't hear him through the window. He was extremely frustrated, complaining that I was becoming difficult to manage, and that he might need to explore other options for accessing my accounts. Other options? He mentioned something about having me declared incompetent if I continued to resist his financial guide. Derek actually discussed the possibility of having me committed for psychological evaluation, so he could gain complete control over my assets. The coldness of Derek's planning took my breath away. This wasn't just theft or even simple greed. Derek was prepared to destroy Maggie's independence and possibly have her institutionalized to access her money. The man I'd married was capable of cruelties I'd never imagined. We need to document this immediately, I said, feeling urgent about protecting Maggie from Derek's escalating scheme. Already handled, dear. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. Catherine now has audio evidence of Derek discussing elder abuse and potential false commitment proceedings. She says this elevates his actions into serious criminal territory. That evening, Derek's behavior toward me shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. He was more attentive than he'd been in months, bringing me coffee while I worked and asking detailed questions about my current design project. Initially, I wondered if guilt about his affair was making him more considerate. Then I realized he was gathering information about my income and client relationships. The Riverside Tourism Board project sounds lucrative, he commented casually while reviewing invoices scattered across my desk. What kind of ongoing relationship are you expecting with them? I gave him vague answers while wondering why he suddenly cared about my freelance work. The mystery resolved itself when I checked the computer monitoring software later that evening. Derek had researched divorce laws regarding spousal support and business assets. He was calculating how my freelance income might affect alimony payments and trying to determine whether my client relationships had ongoing value that could be claimed as marital property. Even his renewed attention was strategic, designed to gather intelligence that would benefit him in divorce proceedings I wasn't supposed to know were coming. The man sharing my bed was treating me like an enemy to be surveilled and ultimately defeated. Wednesday brought a development that accelerated our timeline. Catherine called with urgent news. Derek has scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney for Friday afternoon. My contact at the firm says he's bringing financial documents and asking about expedited proceedings. How much time do we have? I asked, suddenly worried that Derek might file before we could complete our own preparations. Probably 2 weeks at most. Once Derek files, he'll have legal advantages that will be difficult to overcome. We need to strike first, but we also need to ensure our evidence gathering is complete. Catherine had been working with a forensic accountant to trace the stolen funds and hidden assets. We've identified everything Derek thinks he's hidden, but we need a few more days to document the paper trail completely. Can you keep him distracted until early next week? I agreed, though the prospect of maintaining my deception for several more days felt increasingly difficult. Derek's casual affection had become repulsive now that I understood its calculated nature. Every kiss felt like betrayal, every kind word like manipulation. That evening, Derek suggested we have dinner at the Pine Ridge Resort, where Maggie had spotted him with Vanessa. I heard they have excellent seafood, he said with apparent innocence. Might be nice to have a romantic evening together. The audacity of taking me to the same location where he'd conducted his affair was breathtaking. I agreed with enthusiasm I didn't feel, recognizing an opportunity to gather additional evidence while Derek thought he was enjoying a private joke at my expense. During dinner, Derek was unusually charming, reminiscing about our early dating years and making plans for future trips we would never take together. He ordered expensive wine and suggested we stay overnight in one of the resort's luxury suites. We haven't had much couple time lately, he said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. I feel like we should invest more effort in our relationship. I played along while secretly recording everything, but the experience was surreal. Derek was performing the role of devoted husband in the same location where he'd betrayed our marriage, using money he'd stolen to fund what he probably saw as his final manipulation of my emotions before divorcing me. The resort staff clearly recognized Derek from his previous visits with Vanessa. Our waiter seemed confused by my presence, and the sommelier made a comment about Derek having different taste in wine than during his last visit. Derek brushed off these remarks with smooth explanations, but I filed away every detail as additional evidence of his deception. The overnight stay provided an unexpected opportunity for intelligence gathering. While Derek showered, I accessed his phone using the password I'd observed him entering. His text messages with Vanessa revealed their plans to meet the following week at the same resort, apparently for a celebration of some kind. More disturbing were Derek's messages with his divorce attorney, confirming Friday's appointment and discussing strategies for minimizing asset division. Derek had specifically asked about hiding investments and transferring property to avoid sharing it with me. The attorney's responses suggested Derek's approaches might constitute fraud, but Derek seemed unconcerned about legal boundaries. Most shocking of all were Derek's communications with someone named Marcus Chen, apparently a private investigator Derek had hired to dig up information about my background, my friendships, and my family financial history. Derek was looking for anything that could be used against me in divorce proceedings or that might justify reducing my share of our marital assets. By Thursday morning, the scope of Derek's betrayal had expanded beyond anything Catherine or Maggie had anticipated. This wasn't just about stolen money and an extramarital affair. Derek had been conducting comprehensive warfare against both me and Maggie for months, using legal, financial, and investigative resources to ensure he could destroy our lives while protecting his own interests. I called Catherine with an update on everything I'd discovered. Her reaction was immediate and decisive. "We can't wait until next week." Derek's level of planning suggests he's going to move very aggressively once he files for divorce. "We need to beat him to the courthouse and ensure all his hidden assets are frozen before he can transfer them offshore or hide them further." She scheduled an emergency meeting for Thursday evening with the forensic accountant and a private investigator she'd been working with. "Bring everything you've gathered, including the recordings and photographs. We're going to file comprehensive legal actions tomorrow morning that will freeze Derek's assets, expose his theft, and ensure he faces criminal charges for elder abuse." Maggie was equally ready to accelerate our timeline. Derek called this afternoon demanding another meeting about my financial affairs. He sounded increasingly desperate and mentioned something about time-sensitive opportunities that couldn't wait. "I think he's planning something for this weekend." Thursday evening's strategy session lasted until nearly midnight. Catherine's team had uncovered the full extent of Derek's hidden assets and financial manipulation. The forensic accountant estimated Derek had stolen or hidden approximately $90,000 from combined sources, far more than we'd initially calculated. "Derek has been preparing for this divorce for at least 6 months, the accountant explained. He's systematically converted joint assets and Maggie's money into investments and purchases that would be difficult to trace or recover. If he'd been allowed to proceed with his original timeline, you both would have lost everything." The private investigator Catherine had hired revealed additional disturbing information about Derek's activities. "He's been conducting surveillance on both of you, documenting your daily routines, your friendships, your professional relations. Derek has files on everyone in your social circles, apparently looking for information that could be used to discredit your character or claim you've been hiding assets yourselves." Catherine laid out the final strategy for Friday morning's legal assault. "We'll file for emergency asset preservation, immediate separation, elder abuse charges, and civil recovery actions all at once. Derek will wake up Friday morning as a free man planning his future with Vanessa. By Friday afternoon he'll be facing criminal charges, frozen assets, and the complete collapse of everything he thought he'd cleverly arranged." She turned to me with a serious expression. "Claire, once we file these actions, Derek will know everything we've discovered. He'll realize you've been aware of his activities for weeks while pretending ignorance. His reaction is likely to be explosive, and possibly dangerous. Are you prepared for that level of confrontation?" I thought about the destroyed anniversary gift that had started this entire revelation. 3 months of careful work creating something beautiful to celebrate our marriage, torn apart and thrown away like garbage by the man who'd promised to love me forever. I thought about Maggie's stolen money, Derek's plans to have her committed, and his cold calculations about minimizing my share of our shared life. "I'm ready," I said with certainty I hadn't felt in years. "Derek has spent months planning to destroy both of us while pretending to love and care about us. Tomorrow he discovers what happens when you underestimate the women you've betrayed." Friday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Derek dressed for work as usual, kissed me goodbye with familiar casualness, and promised to be home by 6 for a quiet evening together. He had no idea that before noon, legal documents would be filed that would transform his carefully planned future into a nightmare of criminal charges and financial ruin. As Derek's car pulled out of our driveway for the last time as my unsuspecting husband, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. The marriage I'd tried so hard to save was officially ending, but Derek's reckoning was just beginning. At precisely 9:30 Friday morning, Catherine filed a comprehensive legal action that would change Derek's life forever. Emergency motions for asset freezing, temporary restraining orders, elder abuse charges, and civil recovery actions, hit the Clackamas County Courthouse like a legal earthquake designed to shake Derek's world to its foundation. I spent the morning at Maggie's house, watching through her front window as sheriff's deputies served papers at Derek's architectural firm. Catherine had timed everything perfectly. Derek would be publicly served at his workplace, ensuring his colleagues and superiors witnessed his legal troubles firsthand. The firm's strict policies about employee misconduct meant Derek's career would be in jeopardy before he even understood what was happening to him. My phone rang at 11:15. Derek's name appeared on the screen, but when I answered, the voice that greeted me was nothing like the calm, controlled husband I'd known for 7 years. Derek was shouting so loudly that Maggie could hear him from across the room. "What the hell have you done, Claire?" Derek screamed into the phone. "Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed? My career, our future, everything we built together?" I had rehearsed this moment with Catherine, but hearing Derek's rage still made my hands tremble. "I discovered what you've been doing, Derek. The stolen money, the affair, your plans to divorce me while hiding our assets. I decided you should face consequences for your choices." "You vindictive witch," Derek spat, his voice dripping with hatred I'd never heard before. "You have no idea what you're messing with. I'll destroy you in court. I'll make sure you get nothing, absolutely nothing from our marriage." "Actually, Derek, I think you'll find that your options are much more limited than you realize," I replied with composure that surprised me. "You might want to focus on finding a good criminal defense attorney instead of making threats you can't follow through on." The line went silent for several seconds. When Derek spoke again, his voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You recorded me. You've been spying on me like some kind of paranoid psychopath. No court is going to accept evidence obtained through illegal surveillance. Everything we did was completely legal, Derek. Unlike your systematic theft and fraud." I could hear papers rustling in the background as Derek apparently reviewed the legal documents for the first time. "You should pay particular attention to the elder abuse charges. Oregon doesn't take kindly to people who steal from elderly relatives while planning to have them commit." Derek's composure cracked completely. "Maggie put you up to this, didn't she? That manipulative old hag has been poison in our marriage from the beginning. She's jealous that I found happiness with someone else and convinced you to destroy everything out of spite." "Maggie didn't put me up to anything. She simply helped me understand what kind of man I actually married." I felt calm strength flowing through me as I spoke words I'd been preparing for weeks. "Someone who sees relationships as transactions, who steals from people who trust him, who destroys things that matter to other people because he can't feel genuine emotions himself." "Don't you dare lecture me about emotions," Derek shouted. "You with your pathetic romantic gestures and desperate attempts to save our dead marriage. Do you know how embarrassing it was having friends see me with someone so needy and clingy?" His words should have hurt, but instead they confirmed everything I'd learned about his character. "Is that what you told Vanessa? That I was needy and clingy? I wonder what she'll think when she finds out about the criminal charges and frozen assets. I imagine gold diggers lose interest quickly when the gold disappears." Derek's breathing became heavy and labored. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You and that senile old woman think you've won some kind of victory. But you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone tries to destroy me." The implicit threat in his voice made me genuinely frightened for the first time. "Derek, if you're threatening me, you should know that Catherine has advised the police about your potential for violence. Any attempt to intimidate or harm me will only add to your legal troubles." "I'm not threatening you, Claire. I'm promising you, when this is over, when I've proven that everything you've done is based on lies and manipulation, you're going to regret the day you decided to cross me." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone with a mixture of triumph and apprehension. Derek had revealed his true nature more completely than any recording or document ever could. The charming, successful architect had been replaced by someone consumed with rage and thoughts of revenge. Maggie appeared at my side with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "He took it about as well as we expected. How are you feeling?" "Terrified and exhilarated at the same time," I admitted. "For 7 years I've been married to someone I never really knew. The man I just talked to is a stranger, but somehow he feels more honest than the Derek who brought me flowers and told me he loved me." Within an hour, Catherine called with an update on the legal proceeding. Derek's attorney has been trying to schedule an emergency hearing to challenge the asset freeze, but the evidence we've presented is overwhelming. The court is treating this as a serious case of financial fraud with potential criminal implications. She paused before continuing with news that would reshape our entire strategy. "There's been an interesting development. Derek's employer has suspended him pending investigation of the elder abuse charge. Apparently his firm can't afford to be associated with someone accused of stealing from elderly clients or relatives. What does that mean for our case? It means Derek's income has disappeared at exactly the moment when he needs expensive legal representation to fight multiple criminal and civil charges. He's probably realizing that the money he stole and hid was the only thing standing between him and complete financial ruin. Catherine's assessment proved accurate when Derek called again that afternoon. This time his voice carried desperation instead of rage. "Claire, we need to talk, face to face, without lawyers or outside interference. There are things you don't understand about our situation." "I understand everything perfectly, Derek. You stole money from me and Maggie, conducted an affair, and planned to divorce me while hiding our assets. What else is there to discuss?" "It's not that simple," Derek pleaded. "Yes, I made mistakes, but everything I did was for us, for our future. The investments I made are going to pay off. The boat was going to be a surprise for our anniversary. Even my relationship with Vanessa was just a temporary distraction while I worked through some personal issues." The audacity of his rewriting history was breathtaking. "Derek, I have your emails describing me as pathetic and discussing plans to minimize my share of our assets. You threw my anniversary gift in the trash and let another woman write cruel comments on it. Nothing you did was for us." "Those emails were taken out of context," Derek insisted. "Vanessa was jealous and possessive. She made me say things I didn't mean to keep her happy while I figured out how to end things with her. I never intended to actually divorce you." I almost admired his creativity in constructing new lies to cover his previous deception. "So your meetings with divorce attorneys were also just to keep Vanessa happy. Your research into hiding assets was misunderstood. Your plans to have Maggie committed were part of some elaborate strategy to protect her." Derek went silent, apparently realizing that his improvisational explanations weren't addressing the scope of evidence against him. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something I'd never heard before: genuine fear. "Claire, please, the criminal charges could mean prison time. My career is over. Everything we've built together is being destroyed. Can't we find some way to resolve this privately without involving courts and police?" "What are you proposing?" "I'll return every penny I took. I'll end things with Vanessa immediately and publicly. I'll sign whatever agreements you want about our assets and property. Just please, make the criminal charges disappear." For the first time in our conversation, Derek sounded like he understood the gravity of his situation. "Derek, I don't control the criminal charge. The district attorney's office is handling the elder abuse case independently. Even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, I couldn't make those charges disappear." "Then what do you want from me?" Derek asked, his voice breaking with emotion that might have been genuine. "What will it take for you to stop destroying my life?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," I replied. "For 7 years you treated me like someone whose feelings and needs didn't matter. You saw Maggie as an inconvenient elderly relative whose money you could steal without consequence. You assumed you could manipulate and discard people without facing meaningful accountability." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I want you to spend the next several years of your life understanding exactly how it feels when someone you trusted betrays you completely. I want you to experience the same helplessness and humiliation you inflicted on other people." Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I never meant for things to go this far. I loved you, Claire, maybe not the way you needed to be loved, but I did care about you." "No, Derek, you loved the idea of having someone who would make your life comfortable and convenient. You never loved me as a person with independent needs and feelings. If you had, you wouldn't have been capable of treating me the way you did." That evening Catherine called with news that Derek's legal situation had deteriorated further. He's been trying to contact Vanessa all day, but she's apparently not returning his calls. Our investigator spoke with someone at Derek's firm who said Vanessa submitted her resignation this afternoon, and has been telling colleagues she barely knew Derek personally. I wasn't surprised that Vanessa had abandoned Derek the moment his legal troubles became public. Their relationship had been based on his financial stability and professional success, both of which had disappeared within hours of our legal filings. "What happens next?" I asked. "Derek's attorney has requested a settlement conference to discuss resolution of the civil charges, but the criminal case will proceed regardless. The prosecutor's office is treating elder abuse seriously, especially with the level of documentation we've provided." Catherine explained that Derek would likely face several months of legal proceedings, during which his assets would remain frozen and his career prospects would be essentially destroyed. Even if he avoids prison time, which is unlikely given the evidence, Derek's professional reputation is permanently damaged. No architectural firm will hire someone convicted of elder financial abuse. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. Derek's parents, Robert and Linda Hamilton, appeared at my door looking confused and angry. I had always gotten along well with Derek's parents, though we weren't particularly close. They had seemed to genuinely care about their son and had always treated me with kindness and respect. "Claire, we need to understand what's happening," Robert said without preamble. "Derek called us yesterday claiming you've made false accusations that could send him to prison. He says you and Maggie have conspired against him out of jealousy and I invited them in and spent the next hour showing them the same evidence Catherine had compiled for court." Derek's parents reviewed bank statements, read emails, and listened to recorded conversations with expressions of growing horror and disbelief. "This can't be right," Linda whispered, staring at printouts of Derek's messages to Vanessa. "This doesn't sound like our son. Derek would never talk about you this way." "I thought the same thing," I replied gently, "but people aren't always who we think they are, even when we love them." Robert studied the financial documents with the eye of someone who had worked in banking for 30 years. "These withdrawals and transfers show systematic planning over many months. Derek didn't just make impulsive mistakes. He orchestrated deliberate theft while creating false documentation to cover his tracks." Linda began crying as she read Derek's emails about his plans to minimize my share of our assets. "He wrote such cruel things about you, Claire. After 7 years of marriage, how could he see you as an enemy to be defeated instead of a wife to be cherished?" Derek's parents left that afternoon with a completely different understanding of their son's character. As they prepared to go, Robert shook his head sadly. "We raised Derek to be honest and responsible. Somewhere along the way, he became someone we don't recognize. Will you be able to forgive him?" I asked, genuinely curious about their perspective. Linda considered the question carefully. "We'll always love Derek because he's our son, but the person who did these things to you and Maggie isn't someone we can defend or excuse. He'll have to face the consequences of his choices without expecting us to rescue him." Sunday evening brought Derek's final attempt to salvage his situation. He appeared at our front door looking haggard and desperate, apparently hoping to convince me to intervene on his behalf with the prosecutor. I agreed to talk with him on the front porch, but only because Maggie was inside as a witness and Catherine had advised me that any threats or admissions Derek made could be useful in court. "Claire, I'm begging you," Derek said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I never intended for things to end up like this. I was confused and scared about our marriage, and I made choices that hurt everyone I care about." He looked genuinely broken, nothing like the confident, successful man I'd married or even the enraged person who'd screamed at me over the phone. "I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my relationship with Vanessa, probably my freedom. Isn't that enough punishment for my mistake?" "Derek, you didn't make mistakes," I corrected him. "You made calculated decisions over many months to steal money, conduct an affair, and plan to leave me with nothing. Those weren't errors in judgment. They were deliberate choices that revealed your true character." Derek slumped against the porch railing, apparently realizing that his final appeal had failed. "So that's it? 7 years of marriage mean nothing to you? You're going to watch me go to prison without feeling any guilt or regret?" "I feel tremendous sadness about the end of our marriage," I told him honestly. "But I don't feel guilty about ensuring you face consequences for your actions. You treated me and Maggie as disposable people whose lives didn't matter. Now you understand how that feels." Derek looked at me with something approaching respect for the first time in our conversation. "You're not the same person I married, are you? The Claire I knew would have forgiven me and tried to work things out. You're right, I'm not the same person you married. That Claire believed in your essential goodness even when your behavior suggested otherwise. She made excuses for your cruelty and blamed herself when you grew distant and critical. She's gone, Derek. You destroyed her when you threw our marriage away like trash." Derek nodded slowly, finally seeming to understand that the consequences he was facing weren't the result of my vindictiveness, but the natural outcome of his own choices. "I suppose I deserve whatever happens to me." "Yes," I agreed. But more importantly, Maggie and I deserve justice and the chance to rebuild our lives without fear that you'll continue to manipulate and steal from people who trust you." As Derek walked away from our house for the final time, I felt a complex mixture of emotion. Sadness for the marriage that had never been as real as I'd believed. Relief that the deception and betrayal were finally over, and something that might have been forgiveness, not for Derek's sake, but for my own peace of mind. The confrontation phase of our plan was complete. Derek now understood the full scope of his losses and the impossibility of escaping the consequences of his actions. All that remained was watching justice take its course and beginning the process of rebuilding the life he had tried to destroy. 3 months later, I stood in the Clackamas County Courthouse, watching Derek Hamilton accept a plea agreement that would change his life forever. The man who had once commanded respect as a successful architect now wore a standard orange jumpsuit and restraints, his confident demeanor replaced by the hollow stare of someone who finally understood the full weight of his choices. The plea hearing was surprisingly brief. Derek's court-appointed attorney, a harried public defender who had replaced his expensive private counsel when his assets were frozen, advised him to accept the prosecution's offer: 18 months in state prison for elder financial abuse, 5 years of supervised probation, full restitution to both me and Maggie totaling $112,000. Judge Patricia Montoya addressed Derek directly before accepting his plea. "Mr. Hamilton, you have systematically betrayed the trust of 2 women who loved and depended on you. You stole money from an elderly relative while planning to have her declared incompetent to access more of her assets. You deceived your wife while planning to leave her financially devastated. These are not momentary lapses in judgment, but calculated acts of cruelty that reveal a fundamental disregard for human dignity." Derek's response was barely audible. "I understand, Your Honor. I accept responsibility for my actions." Judge Montoya wasn't finished. "The court has reviewed extensive documentation showing that your criminal behavior was accompanied by psychological manipulation designed to make your victims feel responsible for your mistreatment of them. This level of calculated emotional abuse represents a particularly egregious violation of trust that demands significant punishment." As Derek was led away to begin his sentence, he turned briefly toward the gallery where Maggie and I sat with Catherine. His expression held no anger or defiance, only a kind of exhausted acceptance that suggested he finally comprehended what he had lost. I felt no satisfaction in his defeat, only a profound sense of closure that justice had been served. The financial restitution had been more complex than the criminal case. Catherine's forensic accountant had traced Derek's stolen funds through multiple accounts and investments, recovering assets Derek had thought were successfully hidden. The $35,000 boat was sold at auction. The stock investments were liquidated and returned to their rightful owners. Even the life insurance policy with Vanessa as beneficiary was canceled and its cash value applied to restitution. Derek's attempts to hide money in cryptocurrency and offshore accounts had been particularly poorly executed. His lack of expertise in financial fraud had left clear digital trails that investigators followed easily. Rather than protecting his stolen assets, Derek's elaborate schemes had simply provided additional evidence of his criminal intent. The most satisfying recovery had been personal rather than financial. Among Derek's possessions seized by the court, investigators discovered a storage unit containing items he had taken from our house during his systematic preparation for divorce. Hidden among furniture and artwork was a manila envelope containing the remaining pieces of my destroyed anniversary scrapbook. Derek had apparently saved fragments of the gift after destroying it, though whether from guilt or as some kind of twisted trophy was unclear. Catherine's team was able to restore most of the photographs and documents using professional conservation techniques. While the scrapbook could never be completely repaired, having those memories returned felt like reclaiming a part of myself that Derek had tried to erase. Vanessa Cole had disappeared from Derek's life with impressive speed once his legal troubles became public. Within a week of his arrest, she had submitted her resignation at the architectural firm and apparently left Oregon entirely. Private investigators hired by Derek's defense attorney were never able to locate her for potential testimony, suggesting her interest in Derek had been entirely financial. Derek's former colleagues provided character testimony that painted a picture of someone who had been manipulating workplace relationships for years. His supervisor revealed that Derek had been inflating his project contributions while taking credit for other architects' work. His assistant disclosed that Derek had been using company resources for personal projects and had pressured her to cover for his extended absences during his affair with Vanessa. The architectural firm not only terminated Derek's employment, but also filed a civil lawsuit seeking recovery of salary and benefits paid during periods when Derek was conducting personal business on company time. His professional license was suspended pending review by the state licensing board, effectively ending his career in architecture permanently. Derek's parents had struggled with their son's transformation from successful professional to convicted criminal. Robert and Linda Hamilton attended the sentencing hearing but maintained careful distance from Derek's legal defense. They had established a small fund to help with restitution payments, but made clear that Derek would receive no other financial or emotional support until he demonstrated genuine remorse and made meaningful efforts to repair the damage he had caused. Linda Hamilton approached me after the sentencing hearing with tears in her eyes. "Claire, I keep trying to understand how Derek became someone capable of treating you and Maggie so cruelly. I raised him to respect women and protect people who depended on him. I had spent considerable time thinking about Derek's psychology during the months of legal proceedings. I think Derek saw relationships as competitions he needed to win rather than partnerships based on mutual care. He couldn't tolerate the idea that other people had needs or rights that might limit his freedom or require his consideration." Robert Hamilton nodded sadly. Derek always needed to be the smartest person in the room, the one in control of every situation. When your marriage started requiring actual emotional work, when Maggie needed genuine care instead of just financial management, Derek apparently decided it was easier to eliminate the problems than address them honestly. The conversation with Derek's parents helped me understand that his betrayal hadn't been personal failure on my part. Derek had been incapable of sustaining authentic relationships with anyone once those relationships required sacrifice or genuine consideration of other people's needs. His parents, his wife, his elderly aunt had all become obstacles to overcome rather than people to cherish and protect. Maggie had thrived during the months following Derek's arrest. With her stolen money recovered and her independence restored, she had resumed social activities and reconnected with friends she had withdrawn from during Derek's manipulation. The stress of dealing with his theft and threats had lifted, revealing someone far more vibrant and engaged than the frail elderly woman Derek had described to justify his control over her affair. Derek's greatest miscalculation was assuming I was becoming incompetent, Maggie reflected during one of our weekly coffee meetings. He saw my age and decided I was vulnerable to manipulation. He never bothered to actually assess my mental capacity or understand my capability. Maggie had used her experience with Derek's abuse to become an advocate for elder rights in Oregon. She spoke at conferences about financial abuse prevention and worked with Catherine to develop educational materials for seniors about protecting themselves from family members who might exploit their trust. Her sharp mind and direct speaking style made her an effective spokesperson for elderly people who had been victimized by relatives. Derek's theft taught me something valuable about family relationships, Maggie said during a presentation to a senior center audience. Blood relation doesn't guarantee trustworthiness, and loving someone doesn't mean you should ignore evidence of their bad character. Trust should be earned and maintained through consistent behavior, not assumed because someone claims to care about you. My own recovery had been more complex than I initially expected. The end of my marriage had been devastating despite Derek's betrayal requiring me to rebuild not just my financial security but my entire understanding of relationships and trust. Catherine had recommended a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from psychological manipulation and financial abuse. Dr. Sarah Chen helped me understand that Derek's treatment had been designed to make me doubt my own perceptions and blame myself for his behavior. Abusive partners often create situations where their victims feel responsible for the relationship's problems, she explained. Derek's criticism of your romantic gestures, his dismissal of your emotional needs, his gradual isolation of you from friends and independent activities were all classic techniques for establishing control. The therapy sessions revealed how systematically Derek had undermined my confidence and independence. His suggestions about working from home had cut me off from professional colleagues. His criticism of my friends had reduced my social support network. His management of our finances had created dependency that made leaving the relationship seem impossible. The anniversary gift that Derek destroyed represented everything he couldn't tolerate about your relationship, Dr. Chen observed. Your love, your commitment, your belief in the possibility of genuine partnership. Destroying it was Derek's way of rejecting not just your gesture, but your entire approach to marriage and family. Understanding Derek's psychological tactics helped me forgive myself for not recognizing his manipulation sooner. I had been dealing with someone who had deliberately tried to distort my reality and make me question my own judgment. My failure to see through his deception had been the result of his skillful manipulation, not my personal weakness or naivety. The financial recovery had enabled me to rebuild my graphic design business on a much stronger foundation. With the stolen money returned and Derek's debts no longer my responsibility, I was able to invest in better equipment, expand my client base, and eventually hire 2 part-time assistants. The business I had started from our kitchen table grew into a small studio that generated more income than I had ever earned during my marriage. The professional growth felt particularly meaningful because Derek had consistently undermined my confidence in my abilities and the value of my work. He had suggested that freelance graphic design was not a real career and had discouraged me from pursuing larger clients or more ambitious projects. His negative assessments had been designed to keep me dependent on his income and too insecure to leave the marriage. Building a successful business without Derek's involvement proved to myself that his criticisms had been about control rather than accurate evaluation of my capabilities. My clients appreciated my creativity, reliability, and problem-solving skill. My income provided financial independence that made future relationships optional rather than necessary for survival. The legal proceedings had also strengthened my relationship with Catherine, who became both a professional mentor and personal friend. Her firm had taken on several pro bono cases involving financial abuse, using the expertise developed during Derek's prosecution to help other victims recover stolen assets and hold their abusers accountable. Your case was particularly valuable because Derek's documentation of his own crimes was so comprehensive, Catherine explained. Most financial abusers are more careful about covering their tracks. Derek's arrogance and his belief that you and Maggie were too trusting to investigate his activities made him sloppy about evidence. Catherine had offered me a position as a victim advocate with her firm, helping other people navigate the legal system after experiencing financial abuse. The work felt meaningful in ways that went beyond professional satisfaction. Every client I helped represented someone Derek would never be able to victimize. Someone who would understand their rights and options instead of suffering in silence. 1 year after Derek's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter from the state prison where he was serving his term. Derek's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, and his tone was different from any communication we had shared during our marriage or its aftermath. Claire, the letter began, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you choose not to read this letter or respond to it. I am writing because my counselor has suggested that making amends to the people I hurt might be part of understanding what I did wrong and ensuring I never do it again. Derek's letter continued for several pages, describing his experience in prison and his participation in therapy programs designed to help inmates understand the impact of their crime. He wrote about recognizing patterns in his behavior that went back to childhood, acknowledging that he had treated relationships as games to be won rather than partnerships to be nurtured. I realize now that I destroyed our marriage long before you discovered my affair or the stolen money. Derek wrote, I had stopped seeing you as a person with independent value and started seeing you as someone who existed to make my life comfortable and convenient. When you needed emotional support or partnership, I saw those needs as demands that interfered with my freedom. The letter contained what appeared to be genuine remorse for the specific ways Derek had hurt me and Maggie. He acknowledged throwing away the anniversary gift and allowing Vanessa to write cruel comments on it. He admitted planning to divorce me while hiding our assets and described how he had rationalized stealing from Maggie by convincing himself she was incompetent and wouldn't miss the money. I know that apologizing cannot undo the damage I caused or restore what I destroyed, Derek concluded. I am not asking for forgiveness or expecting any kind of response. I simply wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong and I take full responsibility for the pain I caused you and Maggie. I showed the letter to Dr. Chen during our monthly check-in session. Her assessment was cautiously optimistic about Derek's apparent growth, but she warned against interpreting his words as evidence that he had fundamentally changed. People who have engaged in systematic abuse often become very skilled at saying what they think victims want to hear, she explained. Derek may be genuinely remorseful, or he may be practicing manipulation techniques he hopes will be useful when he's released. The only meaningful measure of his change will be his behavior over years, not his words during incarceration. I decided not to respond to Derek's letter, though I felt no anger toward him for writing it. The man who had destroyed our marriage and stolen from elderly relatives was no longer someone whose thoughts or feelings were relevant to my life. Whether Derek had genuinely changed or was simply employing new manipulation tactics mattered far less than the fact that he no longer had any power to affect my well-being. 2 years after Derek's arrest, Maggie and I established a foundation dedicated to helping victims of elder financial abuse recover stolen assets and rebuild their lives. The Margaret Brennan Foundation provided grants for legal representation, financial counseling, and therapeutic support for elderly people who had been exploited by family members or caretakers. The foundation's first major project was funding a comprehensive study of financial abuse patterns in Oregon, documenting the methods abusers used and the warning signs family members should recognize. The research revealed that Derek's tactics had been surprisingly common: gradual assumption of financial control, isolation from independent advisors, creation of artificial emergencies requiring immediate asset transfers, and threats of abandonment if the victim questioned the abuser's management. Derek wasn't particularly creative in his abuse, Maggie observed during the Foundation's first annual report presentation. He used standard techniques that have been documented in thousands of similar cases. The tragedy is that these methods work so effectively because they exploit the victim's love and trust. The Foundation also funded training programs for bank employees, social workers, and healthcare providers to help them identify signs of elder financial abuse and intervene appropriately. Many cases could be prevented if professionals knew what warning signs to look for and how to approach potentially vulnerable seniors about suspicious financial activity. My work with abuse victims had taught me that recovery required more than just financial restitution or criminal prosecution of the abuser. People who had been systematically manipulated needed to rebuild their confidence in their own judgment and their ability to maintain healthy relationships. The psychological damage often lasted longer than the financial impact. Derek's abuse was designed to make you question your own perceptions and blame yourself for his behavior, I explained to Sarah, a 73-year-old woman whose son had stolen over $50,000 while convincing her she was becoming confused and forgetful. Recognizing that distortion of reality is the first step toward trusting yourself again. Sarah's case reminded me of my own recovery journey. Her son had used the same techniques Derek had employed: gradual assumption of control, creation of artificial crises, and systematic undermining of the victim's confidence in her own ability. The patterns were so consistent across different families and circumstances that they seemed like a standard playbook for financial abuse. 5 years after finding my destroyed anniversary gift in the trash, I was living a life Derek could never have imagined. My graphic design business had grown into a regional firm with 12 employees and clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. The foundation Maggie and I had established was helping hundreds of elder abuse victims each year. I had developed expertise in financial crime investigation that made me a sought-after consultant for law enforcement agencies. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment and recognize my own worth independent of any romantic relation. The woman who had made excuses for Derek's cruelty and blamed herself for his dissatisfaction was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love required mutual respect and genuine partnership. Derek was released from prison after serving 14 months of his 18-month sentence, with time off for good behavior and participation in rehabilitation program. He was required to remain in Oregon for his probationary period, but his ability to find employment in his former field was essentially non-existent. His criminal record and suspended professional license made him unemployable in architecture or any related field requiring professional license. I heard through Catherine that Derek had found work as a construction laborer and was living in a modest apartment near his parents' home. He had made no attempts to contact me or Maggie, apparently understanding that any communication would violate the restraining orders that remained in effect. His restitution payments were being made regularly through the court system, suggesting he was meeting his legal obligations without attempting to manipulate the process. Derek's greatest punishment isn't prison time or financial penalties, Catherine observed during a recent conversation. It's living with the knowledge that his victims are thriving without him while he struggles to rebuild a life from nothing. He destroyed his marriage, his career, his reputation, and his relationship with his family for an affair that lasted 6 months with someone who abandoned him immediately when his resources disappeared. Derek's story had become a cautionary tale within Oregon's legal and social services community. His systematic abuse of 2 women who trusted him, combined with his spectacular downfall when his victims fought back, illustrated both the devastating impact of financial abuse and the importance of comprehensive legal response to such crime. The anniversary gift that Derek had thrown away like garbage had ultimately become the catalyst for justice that protected other potential victims from experiencing similar betrayal. My 3 months of careful work documenting our marriage had been destroyed, but the destruction had revealed Derek's true character and enabled Maggie and me to build something much more valuable, a foundation for helping other people recognize abuse and fight back against. On the 5th anniversary of that terrible morning when I discovered my gift in the trash, I visited Derek's gravesite at Riverside Memorial Cemetery. Not Derek himself, who was still alive and serving his probation, but the symbolic grave of the marriage I had tried so hard to save. I placed a single rose on the grass and said a final goodbye to the woman who had believed love could overcome any obstacle if she just tried hard enough. The woman walking away from that cemetery was someone Derek had never known and would never understand, someone who valued herself enough to demand better treatment, who trusted her own perceptions enough to recognize manipulation, and who understood that genuine love required mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. Derek's gift had been in the trash, but it hadn't been the scrapbook. His real gift had been showing me exactly who he was and what our marriage had actually been worth to him. That knowledge had hurt desperately at the time, but it had ultimately freed me to build a life based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership. Standing in the afternoon sunlight outside the cemetery, I realized that Derek Hamilton had given me the most valuable gift of all, the understanding that I deserved better than anything he had ever been capable of offering. His biggest mistake hadn't been throwing away my anniversary gift. His biggest mistake had been underestimating what I would do once I understood how little he valued our marriage and the people who depended on him. Derek would remember that mistake for the rest of his life, while I would spend the rest of mine ensuring that other people didn't have to learn the same lessons the hard way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.